They said the overseer of Willow Creek Plantation feared nothing but the screams, not the blood, not the way the slaves stopped praying when he walked by. For years he whipped 99 souls without hesitation, until the night he raised his hand for the 100th, and something in the darkness finally answered back. Witnesses swore the wind changed, the animals fled, and the overseer himself begged for mercy from something no one could see. Whatever came for him had been waiting a long time. The overseer of Willow Creek Plantation, known to all simply as Cutter for the merciless precision with which he wielded his whip, cast a shadow that stretched across the fields and quarters like a living storm, a darkness that seemed to sap the very air of warmth and hope, and from the first glimmer of dawn, his presence was felt in every trembling step of the enslaved, whose eyes never dared meet his and whose bodies bore the scars, both visible and hidden, of his unrelenting cruelty. Cutter was a tall, gaunt man, his face weathered and etched with lines of hardness, eyes cold and calculating, hands steady as steel, moving through the plantation with the relentless patience of a predator seeking the slightest misstep. The smallest hesitation, and each crack of his whip was more than punishment. It was a ritual, a demonstration of absolute dominance that left fear like a stain in the air long after the echoes of leather against flesh had faded. The slaves whispered his name in hushed tones, recounting stories of his past punishments, the way he had whipped 99 victims with a methodical, almost ceremonial precision, each lash a testament to his power. Yet as his cruelty escalated, subtle and inexplicable signs began to follow his steps. Animals would refuse to approach him, horses balking and dogs retreating as though some invisible force warned them to flee. Doors would creak open in empty houses, lanterns would flicker as if responding to his gaze, and the wind itself seemed to bend around him, carrying whispers the slaves claimed were voices of ancestors, or the plantation itself murmuring disapproval. Even the masters occasionally exchanged uneasy glances when Cutter passed, noting the predatory intensity in his eyes, the way he observed every movement, every shadow, every sound, as if the very essence of the plantation were under his control, yet unable to contain the latent unease that seemed to follow him like a second skin. The older enslaved people muttered that the land had long memories, that Cutter's relentless brutality had awakened something patient and watchful, something that had borne silent witness to decades of suffering and cruelty. And each time he walked among the fields or through the quarters, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a tightening in the air that pressed against lungs and hearts alike, reminding all who beheld him that his wrath was absolute. The children learned quickly to flinch at the snap of his voice, to fear the sound of footsteps approaching, while the adults carried both the weight of past lashings and the premonition of more to come, a tension that seemed to seep into the soil itself, making the very ground shiver beneath Cutter's boots. Rumors spread of nights when he wandered the woods alone, speaking to shapes no one else could see, or staring into the darkness with a gaze so focused it unnerved even the oldest slaves. And the wind sometimes carried back low murmurs that no one could explain, as if the plantation itself whispered warnings, warnings ignored by the overseer but keenly noted by those who had long endured his cruelty. By the time he prepared to administer his 100th whipping, the air on Willow Creek was heavy with anticipation, a mixture of dread and a strange, unnameable hope that some force beyond human comprehension might intervene. For the subtle signs, the shifting shadows, the trembling animals, the eerie whispers, the sudden chills had grown too consistent to ignore, and even among the enslaved, there was a quiet understanding that the overseer's reign of terror was approaching a reckoning, whether mortal or otherwise. Cutter remained oblivious, confident in his mastery over every living thing on the plantation. Yet the land, the air, and the very night seemed to bristle against him, signaling that the culmination of his cruelty, the 100th lash, would not unfold as he had meticulously planned, and that the dark, watching world surrounding Willow Creek had long since taken note of every lash, every scream, every moment of terror he had inflicted, quietly preparing for the moment when justice, however incomprehensible or supernatural, would finally arrive, leaving Cutter to face consequences he had neither anticipated nor imagined. The night Cutter chose for his 100th whipping arrived with a darkness heavier than any before. The Georgia sky swollen with storm clouds that churned ominously above Willow Creek Plantation. And from the moment the first shadow of evening touched the fields, an unnatural tension gripped the air as though the land itself sensed the culmination of his cruelty. The enslaved huddled silently in the quarters, hearts hammering, yet this was no ordinary storm, for the wind carried a bone-chilling cold that made lantern flames tremble and animals whimper and flee, horses rearing and dogs cowering as though some invisible predator had emerged from the shadows. And even the overseer, confident in his brutality, faltered slightly as the temperature dropped and the air thickened unnaturally around him. As he raised his arm to strike the trembling victim before him, a low vibration pulsed through the ground and air, a resonance that seemed alive, humming through bones and stirring terror in the hearts of all who witnessed it. While shadows stretched and twisted along the cotton rows, forming shapes darker than night itself, moving with deliberate intent toward the overseer, whose eyes widened in disbelief. The lashes he had delivered to 99 souls could not have prepared him for this. The wind carried whispers of voices untraceable, a chorus of the wronged rising with the storm, accusing, lamenting, warning, and the whipping victim froze, sensing an unseen presence brushing cold against his skin. Cutter staggered, whip slipping from his hands as the very plantation seemed to awaken. The earth trembling beneath him, lanterns flickering violently, shadows curling and stretching into impossible forms, the air heavy and alive, pressing against him with a force older than any man could comprehend. And in that terrifying instant he realized that his 100th lash would never land, that some ancient, unseen force had intervened, delivering a judgment far beyond mortal punishment, one that had patiently waited for decades of cruelty to demand its reckoning. The night Cutter chose for his 100th whipping descended over Willow Creek Plantation like a darkness heavier than any before. The Georgia sky swollen with storm clouds, and from the moment evening fell, an unnatural tension gripped the air as though the land itself sensed the culmination of his cruelty. The enslaved huddled silently in their quarters, hearts hammering, yet this was no ordinary storm, for the wind carried a bone-chilling cold that made lantern flames tremble and animals whimper, horses rearing and dogs cowering as if some invisible predator had emerged. And even Cutter, confident in his brutality, faltered as the air thickened unnaturally around him. As he raised his arm to strike the trembling victim, a low vibration pulsed through the ground and air, humming through bones and stirring terror, while shadows twisted along the cotton rows, forming shapes darker than night itself, moving with deliberate intent toward the overseer. The lashes he had delivered to 99 souls could not have prepared him for this. The wind carried whispers of voices untraceable, a chorus of the wronged rising with the storm, accusing, lamenting, warning, and the victim froze, sensing that something incomprehensible had arrived, something older than the plantation, patient, relentless, that had absorbed every act of cruelty and now answered. Cutter staggered, whip slipping from his hands, as the plantation seemed to awaken, the earth trembling, lanterns flickering, shadows curling into impossible forms, and he realized his 100th lash would never land, that an ancient, unseen force had intervened, delivering judgment far beyond mortal punishment. Shadows rose, wind whispered voices of the oppressed, and Cutter felt a terror no whip or authority had ever invoked. He fell to his knees as the ground rippled beneath him, shadows closing in, an unearthly presence brushing against his skin, leaving a trail of icy fire. Dawn broke over a plantation forever changed, the overseer gone, the field empty, and the enslaved emerging to witness the lingering sense of something ancient having passed, leaving behind a silence thick with warning. A chilling testament whispered across Georgia of 100 lashes answered not by human hands, but by the land itself.